Could you stay here a minute and maybe the ladies also come with us for a
Sure.
second? Because as many of you know, we are family now. The church in Holland and the church here is like together.
Yeah.
So we also actually wanted to congratulate you guys with the new building, but then from your family in Holland. But I felt like saying a few more words. Can we maybe have the first slide on? You guys, we know that you live around this verse. So Pastor George and Pastor Tara are so pouring their life into the church. So when Peter said, "You're the Christ, you're the Son of the living God." And then Jesus says, "And on that rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." He means the church. And this couple tend to call the church the bride. Well, we'll be hearing more about that during the sermon, but at this point we want to say, guys, we are impressed, we are inspired, we are amazed, and we're very proud of you, how you guys pour your lives into the bride of Christ. And we're just amazed, but also really proud of you guys. And I don't think I just speak on behalf of the Holland family, but I think I speak on behalf of the whole church when we say thank you, thank you, thank you. And Cody made something, so maybe you can show the church. It's funny.
Yes.
It's the gates of hell.
The gates of hell from Israel.
It's Banias in Israel. So that's our thank you and our congratulations with the new building.
We love you guys.
Hope you'll enjoy it.
So there you go.
Thank you.
Love you, man.
Thank you, man. Love you.
Proud of you.
Oh, thank you. There you go. Oh, thanks. Thank you. Hey, man. Awesome.
We'll hug later, Tam.
Hey.
Otherwise, it's going to take more of my time. Well, as you notice, language is a bit of a problem because English is not my mother tongue. And Dutch speaking English, that is pretty tricky. So once there was a Dutchman who wants to say thank you, and they did it together with his wife, thanking a chef somewhere in the restaurant. So he said, "I thank you of the bottom of my heart." But then as he was saying that, I forget my wife. He said, "On behalf of her bottom." So, guys, cut it out later, please. So the theme of this morning is 5 times more. And Pastor Josh had it as a year theme for the church here. But at the same time, God was showing it to me at that point when I was leading the church in Holland. Little did I know that Josh would take it over the church and that we would have the same theme. Now, we were both put on track by Pastor Prince because he wrote this phenomenal book, Benjamin Generation. And just for the people who are new to it and the first-time visitors, Pastor Josh preached about it. So if you go to the Redemption app at the beginning of the year, there are wonderful sermons about 5 times more. But just for the sake of the new people, I'm going to shortly share with you what we learned from Pastor Prince. So he took the story of Joseph in the Old Testament, and he showed us there is this wonderful prophetic typology in it. So there's Jacob, which you could say is Israel, and in the house of Israel there are 2 women, Leah and Rachel. And Leah is a picture of the Old Covenant. She has 10 sons, which is a picture of the law. Who knows? The Old Covenant is the 10, the law. And then there's Rachel, and she has 2 sons. She's a picture of the New Covenant, of grace. And there's 2 sons. There's Joseph and there's Benjamin. Now, when you look at the whole story, it's actually like an era which is actually around the first coming of Jesus and the second coming of Jesus. So as the story unfolds, in the first coming of Joseph, when they are confronted, the 10 with Joseph, which is like the one living on the law confronted with Jesus, that didn't work out well. Who know John 1 says, he came among his own, but his own have not accepted him. That's happening there. And he ends up being thrown in a pit. as Jesus, when he came the first time, end up in a grave. And here they left Joseph for dead. They thought he was died, but he came out. And what do we know about Jesus? He came out. So what happens then? Joseph is taken and he's brought to Egypt, which is a picture of the world. Who knows that as Jesus was rejected by most of the Jews, he went into the world for his Gentile bride. So did Joseph, but not to give up, not to give up. It will all end up well, and so did it with Joseph. So what happened? Joseph was for a certain time in Egypt and he became king. And then there comes a famine in the land, and then the brothers show up. But before Joseph reveals himself to them, few things are happening. So he doesn't reveal himself, he sends them back, and then they run out of food and they have to come again. But he requested, bring Benjamin. And the interesting thing of Benjamin is he came from the same mother as Joseph. You could say he was born from the new covenant. Anyone in grace here? You're from that breed. And now we go to a few scriptures which help us to see in the Bible. Is there 5 times more? So first we read from Genesis 43, verse 29, and then you need to realize this is the moment that Joseph saw Benjamin for the first time, close to his second revealing. And what are the words of Joseph to the one who's born from the same mother, from the same covenant? And he said, God be gracious to you, my son. There's grace. And why 5 times more? Then we look a bit further, and then it says, for instance, in verse 34, when portions were served to them, so all the brothers at the table together with Joseph, who was still hidden, all portions were served to them from Joseph's table. Benjamin's portions was 5 times as much as anyone else's. Who knows that grace is equal to the number of 5? So when Benjamin comes, Joseph says immediately, God be gracious to you, my son. But what does it mean if God is gracious to you, my son and daughter? What does that mean? If God is gracious to you, you'll end up having 5 times more. So with the revelation of grace, with the new covenant being fully revealed as we are close to the second coming, it's time for 5 times more. And not just food. Because a bit further in the story, and that's the last one we read from this story, is Genesis 45, 22. To every one of them he gave 3 changes of clothing. But to Benjamin he gave 300 bits of silver and 5 changes of clothes. Ladies? Hallelujah. You know what I had in the desert? 38 years the same clothes. Shoes not getting worn out. Man, that's like hell on earth for a lady, I think. 38 years the same shoes, no other shoes. Well, good news for the Benjamin generation. You'll have 5 times more. Now, as I knew this, but for years it didn't really come strong to me. But 2 years ago, I was in Israel. I was on a trip. And there the Lord starts speaking to me about the same theme. So if you look at Israel on the map, it's like just a slide with on this side the Mediterranean. And then in the upper part of the nation, there is Golan Heights. And they say about that place, on Golan Heights, that Armageddon is going to take place there. So the last big war. Now, when you're in the upper part of the nation of Israel, the border on the other side is towards Syria. So we were standing at that border, and there's even an office from the UN and UN soldiers, but we were at the Israel side standing there. And you know what? As we were standing at that border, we could hear the bombs. You know, they were fighting with IS there. So we were like, man, it's coming so close. It's coming. We're so far in time. We're standing on Armageddon ground, and the war seems to be coming closer and closer and closer. So from that point, we were dragged into a bus, because you go with a bus, and then we drove like 5 or 10 minutes, and I was pulled into this luxury olive factory. And as you come to some locations in Israel, there's immediately like this commercial room where you need to sit down and watch a movie. So I was like, man, I was all impressed by these war, the rumors of war the Bible speaks about, you know, the rumors of war. So I thought, oh no, who made the order in this trip? What guy puts me from that into a commercial room? There I have to sit the movie. And the Lord spoke in my heart, son, stop complaining. Sit and watch and listen carefully. And that was so firm on my inside that I almost was like a schoolboy. Okay. So, and there comes that movie from the owner of that olive factory. And he starts talking about how they started the company in 1997, and that they start to develop with the olive, and actually normally they use the olive for the oil. So they get olives and then they start pressing them, and then oil comes out, and they do it 3 times, and then you get different types of oil. And that was wonderful, but then there was also a residue. So after you press an olive, you get this oily, almost like stinky looking black stuff which is left over, and they found out it's poisonous. So if we just throw it back in the ground or in the nature, it's poisonous, we cannot do it. So they start storing it. They say we cannot take from the land and put poisonous stuff back. We cannot do this. So what to do? Well, let's store it. So, and then one day, he was walking through that stuff, and then he stumbled. And he fell into the stuff. Almost wrong. And he said, it was terrible. It was terrible. It was sticky. It was dirty. It was all over me. It was in my ears. It was in my nose. It was everywhere. He said, and it took me half an hour to get it all off and out. He said, but then, after a few hours, I felt my skin and thought, wow, I feel like a baby. So what happened is that they start to realize, hey, it might be poisonous to the ground, but there's good stuff in here. And then he starts explaining, we found out that the residue, which is actually called the body of the olive, that there's fantastic stuff in that. Let me read it quickly. How do they say it on the site? On the site, it's like this. You can look it up on the internet. It's Olea Essence, the olive factory. It says it was Abner's destiny to slip and fall in the pile of olive residue. He was not indifferent to what happened and started to explore the olive residue and its virtues. That's how Olea Essence today, fully natural olive skincare line was born. And then the Lord said to me, he said, did you listen? How much oil do you get from olive when you press it? So when you press an olive, it's 70